Nadhim Zahawi, chairman of the Conservative Party, cabinet minister, and, not that long ago, Chancellor of the Exchequer. You may have forgotten that. We had quite a few, to be fair. Now, this should be the big burning issue at the moment with the Conservative government. There's a lot going on. But in terms of Tory politicians, this is where the focus should be. And this is allegations surrounding the tax affairs of Nadhim Zahawi. Now, there was almost no media coverage. This has changed a little bit, but it's getting nowhere near the attention that it deserves. It should be splashed all over the BBC. And it's about this. The allegations are that he avoided paying capital gains on the sale of his polling company, YouGov, using an offshore trust, saving, potentially, several million pounds, perhaps £3.7 million is the figure being bandied around. And now it has been revealed that he has had to pay several millions, but we don't know how much, to His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. We don't know more details than that. I should say Mr. Zahawi said his tax affairs were and are fully up to date and paid in the UK. Neither he or his direct family are beneficiaries of Balfour investments or any trust associated with it. Mr. Zahawi has always said that he will answer any questions from HMRC, which he has always done. Now, the questions are, because he was previously asked about this last year, was he transparent and honest in what he said? We don't know. We don't know the answers to these questions because they haven't been given. to be completely straightforward about it, and there isn't enough media pressure on the Tories, and particularly Nadhim Zahawi, about this. Now, as I've said, there has been very limited media coverage about this, but a good exception is BBC's Newsnight. So let me just put a clip to put a bit more context.
So what's alleged to have happened here? The core of the allegation is that the Tory party chair, cabinet minister without portfolio and former Chancellor of the Exchequer avoided paying capital gains on the sale of the polling company he founded, YouGov, by the use of an offshore trust. It was estimated by the independent tax expert and also supporter of the Labour Party, Dan Needle, last year that the sum he avoided was in the region of £3.7 million. Here's what Mr. Zahawi said at the time.
I've always declared my taxes. I paid my taxes in the UK. I will answer any questions HMRC has of me.
So what's changed? Well, reports in the Sun newspaper at the weekend suggest Mr. Zahawi has, in fact, agreed to pay several million in tax to HMRC, the tax office, after scrutiny of his family's financial affairs. There was no detail on what that reported settlement related to, but bear in mind the context described earlier. HMRC won't comment on individuals on the grounds of confidentiality, but Mr. Zahawi is not denying he has made a settlement with them.
Now, I'm going to broaden this out a bit, because this is about the nature of British society, not just the British Conservatives, that's important, not just about Nadhim Zahawi for that matter. It's about how British society works. And the issue of alleged tax avoidance, again, we've got allegations, so we don't know, by the way, just to be very clear, in fact, I'll just go through definitions. We don't know what Nadhim Zahawi has done or what he's guilty of, if he's guilty of something particularly, because we haven't had answers to the questions. But let's just go through the differences between tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance is when you go against the spirit of the law. Tax evasion is when you go against the letter of the law. So tax evasion is just an outright criminal offence. It's when you're expected to pay a certain amount of tax and you just don't pay it. That's evasion. Tax avoidance is when you try and find devious loopholes in the law and you try and exploit them. So you're finding legislation and you're going against what that legislation intended, but you're basically being pedantic, if you like. You're kind of finding things which go against what that legislation was intended to do in a way that financially benefits you. Now, that sort of behaviour is generally not accessible to the vast majority of people in this country because you generally need very skilled accountants who are very skilled at knowing what the loopholes are, how legislation is worded, how certain things which have been provided by the law can be exploited in order to reduce the amount that you are liable to pay in tax. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So we're talking about using technicalities, if you like, or ruses, which aren't something that can get you arrested. Although, would you even get arrested? That's something we'll talk about. Rather than just actually breaking the law. Now, in the case of Nadhim Zahawi, was this attempted tax avoidance, which failed because if he was trying to avoid tax, he hasn't got away with it because he's had to pay a lot to HMRC. But the question is as well, has he been fined? Because if they don't have to disclose that, and that would mean something other than tax avoidance. We don't know. Can't accuse him of anything directly because there isn't enough pressure on him to answer the questions, but those are the things that he has to answer. Because you cannot have a cabinet minister, a Tory politician, someone who helps run the country, behaving in ways he's a very rich man, I should say, extremely wealthy man, at a time when millions of people are struggling to make ends meet in a unprecedented cost of living crisis. The idea that a very rich Tory politician helping to run the country is trying to avoid paying tax he's liable to pay, well, if that's what's happened, then obviously that is a massive scandal because you and I and everybody else have to just pay our taxes. I mean, it's really as straightforward as that. Now, the reason this is important to talk about is how the state operates and how it treats people who are wealthy differently from those who are struggling. Now, billions of pounds of money are lost through tax avoidance. We don't know if that's what the attempt by Nadhim Zahawi was, but as I've said, if it was, he didn't get away with it. If he was trying to legally avoid tax, it hasn't worked, but we don't know if it's worse than that. That doesn't make it better, I should say. If you're just trying to be a rich person trying to exploit laws against their intentions is obviously is legally not problematic in the way tax evasion is, but I think morality matters in these things, don't you? Billions of pounds are lost through tax avoidance every year, and that's by wealthy individuals and companies finding ways to avoid paying what their law intended them to pay. That's when we're told there isn't enough money to pay nurses a proper wage, when nurses are being sent, of course, or being forced to go to food banks in order to support them and their families, when our National Health Service is collapsing all around us, when our public services are being slashed, when the welfare state isn't supporting people in the way it desperately needs to, not least during a cost of living crisis. Now, around 1 in 5 of the biggest companies in this country don't pay tax each year. As I've said, it's important to broaden this out. And there's another point about how the state exists to facilitate the horrendous greed of the rich, but it clamps down on the far smaller misdemeanors of the poor. Now, one example I'm going to give is how big accountancy firms like Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte and KPMG are seconded to the government, to the Treasury. They help draw up the tax laws, and then they go and tell their clients how to avoid the very laws that they have designed. So, for example, after the coalition came to power in 2010, KPMG seconded staff to the Treasury to focus on developing what was called controlled foreign company and patent box rules. You don't need to know exactly what that means, but what they did is they offered advice to the Treasury. They produced brochures on these rules, boasting of their role in counselling government. And then, one example that was highlighted by the Public Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, they suggested this legislation represents a business opportunity to reduce UK tax and that KPMG can help clients in the preparation of defendable expense allocations. So they help draw up laws and then they help their clients to avoid paying tax. That's the point I'm trying to make. So you get this mass facilitation of tax avoidance by the state, but if you commit benefit fraud, you're in a lot of trouble, aren't you? And in fact, you are 23 times more likely to be prosecuted for benefit fraud than tax fraud, even though tax crimes cost the economy 9 times more. To avoid a exchange of legal letters with Nadhim Zahawi's team, I'm not accusing him of committing a tax crime. I'm saying we don't know what he's done. We don't know if he has attempted to avoid tax. We don't know if he's been fined because he hasn't told us. So we need to find out. But there is a broader point here about who pays taxes, who doesn't, about how the rich get away with pretty much anything in this country, whilst people at the bottom have the states crashing down on their shoulders if they cross lines, whether it be benefit fraud or having a bit of wacky-backy in their pockets. This exposes the nature of British society. One rule for them, one rule for everybody else. Please like, subscribe, and do support us on patreon.com/owenjones84 because we don't have rich tax avoiders funding us. See you in a bit.